Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Eternal News episode. I know I'm really late on this one. I have been away once the news broke, and then when I came back I kinda got caught up in a lot of stuff or, let's be honest, just ended up forgetting because it already was kind of a bit away, but I figured there might still be enough people wanting to hear my perspective and my opinion on the balance changes that happened a bit more than 2 weeks ago now. So I figured I'll do it anyway for the sake of completion and for the people that still care about my take on those things, since there hasn't been any major event in between. So even though there have been more than 2 weeks past, not a whole lot has happened or changed, so it might still be relevant to do this. So let's take a look at the balance changes that happened. Alright, first off, we have the nerfs. Kind of a new precedent here, the first time that a campaign card has been changed. Corroviat Palace now gives, when you play a unit with 4 strength or more, it gets Aegis instead of units with 4 strength or more have endurance. So it doesn't do anything the turn you play it. You need to play units afterwards to benefit from its static ability, which I think is a good change generally, since I felt like that was deceptively what made the card a bit too good, because normally sides aren't that good at defending themselves. So they usually, no matter how strong the effect is, they usually suffer from a certain fragility, and you need to be ahead or stable on board for them to really go through their rotation and not just die the next turn. And endurance allows you to really pressure the opponent and still protect your side, which puts the opponent in a situation where they are in a lose-lose scenario, while otherwise with other sides, if you pressure the opponent and decide to go on the offense, you expose your side, which is a fair trade-off. And Palace allowed you to press the advantage, push towards the end of the game, and still protect your side, which was a bit too much, especially given that Withstand created one unit automatically with endurance that was also really hard to interact with due to Aegis, and really hard to attack through due to the size. So it just kind of protected itself way too well and allowed you to go on the offense while still playing defense. And doing multiple things well is usually a sign of something being too good. If you can play offense and defense well, you don't really have a lot of weaknesses. The next change is one that I'm a bit sad about, that also concerns Palace. It's the change to Withstand, because Withstand was actually kind of a cool and interesting card for Constructed. I messed around with it a bit, you might have seen me do that on stream, and now I think the card is basically useless for Constructed, because instead of Aegis now it gives endurance, so it's just kind of a big permanent what's the word, the 2-cost trick that gives endurance 2, and that already wasn't that great. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but yeah, they kind of just wanted to shift the Aegis endurance thing for Palace there, but I don't like how they did it. I think I like that they changed the static to something that gives you value later, but I don't like the change to Withstand. I would have preferred for them to just leave Withstand alone maybe, and just Palace not give endurance at all maybe. Something like that. But yeah, it is what it is. Next we have Svetio Sanctum. Not that big of a surprise. Card really pushed Huru control to the forefront there and made it one of the most, if not the most dominant deck at the moment, to a point where they were concerned that sort of pseudo-unitless control decks are too dominant and they usually want to rein them in. So now Sanctum costs 6 instead of 5, making it still decent, but much higher risk to play, and it might make Sanctum more of a black market card with Smuggler than a 4 of main deck going forward, since it is more situational now, but we will have to see how that plays out leading up to Worlds. The other one that is a bit surprising to me is the change to ManuS Chains. I felt the card was fine, it was well casted, sure it was powerful, but it also was expensive and required you to be heavy justice. and I felt it was overall balanced. And I feel like the change, putting it to 9, makes it a fringe market card / unplayable constructed card, which is a bit sad because it was one of the cooler like late game payoffs. And it's fine if late game payoffs are really powerful. The more expensive and situational a card is, the more powerful it has to be when it is good. And I felt like ManuS Chains was in a fine spot there, but they felt like Sanctum Chains is making these hero control decks too good, and they changed it. Next we have a couple of other nerfs, interesting ones. First of all, we have Vicious Highwayman. Interesting change here, but not a bad one. I think the change is fine. Basically, they felt like Highwayman is a bit too oppressive on 1 toughness units, especially also too early. So yeah, they wanted to change that, and I think that's not unreasonable because it is true Highwayman is one of the main considerations when putting units in your deck, and if they die to Highwayman, they have to be really worth it and or cheap and pull a lot of weight before Highwayman comes down. If they die to Highwayman pings, because it's just such a tempo and value swing. So yeah, now Highwayman is a 5/3 for 5 instead of a 4/2 for 4. I think that makes it a lot worse. As a main deck card, it's definitely not really playable anymore for aggressive decks. It's not that main deckable anymore because at 5 it competes with too many better cards like Eclipse Dragon, I think. But it is at the very least still a great one-off market card for Stonescar midrange, for example, against the right decks. I had, like in a lot of my versions, only one in the market anyway, as a tool where it shines, because the card otherwise, when it doesn't have targets, which people often reduce significantly if Highwayman is in the mix, then suddenly you run into decks that have little to no targets, and then you have a 4/2 charge that trades with like merchants that otherwise do nothing and so on. So yeah, the card definitely had its issues, and the format adapted to it. I do see benefits in softening up the format though, and allowing people more to be able to consider more cards without too severe punishment by Highwayman, so that's a decent change. Then we have seen a nerf to the prior buffed Amaranth Stinger, this time to its stats, and the stats were reduced from 2/4 to 2/3. That's certainly not that big of a change, given that you care more about the times where the card connects with the opponent, so isn't blocked, so stats don't matter in that scenario where you're not being blocked. But some units that otherwise might have had a hard time blocking it now can block it better, but not a whole lot come to mind. In Constructed there aren't a whole lot of 3/2s that might have like blocked it before, but one that comes to mind, for example, is the Merchant or Smuggler in Stonescar midrange. Like in the past, if you played a turn 3 Smuggler or Merchant, you had this 3/2, then they play Stinger and you're screwed and you just get hit, and that was super devastating and a really big issue. And now it's a 3/2, so they just attack, you trade with your Smuggler or Merchant, and you're fine. No big deal. In the past, you sometimes even had to like jump block with your 3-drop to not give them the infiltrate because it was so bad for you. So this is kind of a bit of a nerf to time against Stonescar, which is a bit ironic because that matchup is already highly favored for Stonescar, and Stinger was one of the things where if they could hit you with a Stinger early on, they could maybe get in a position where they could pull ahead and become the favorite. And now this is going to be even harder. I think the card, sorry about that, the card definitely lost quite a lot of appeal. It was kind of a go-to thing in time for a while, especially in conjunction with Teacher. Like Teacher into Stinger was very brutal. The traps make the Teacher weights have more impact. They both are really good units and stat-wise and ability-wise. So that was kind of like the 1-2 punch of time decks. And now Stinger will probably fall out of favor a little. It's not that big of a deal since we just got Tokas in time as well, so you still have enough good 3-drop options, but yeah, Stinger is kind of gonna fall by the wayside a bit, I would predict. And last but not least of these 3 nerfs, we have Boar, which is pretty interesting, honestly, since while I thought the card was very good and a bit oppressive and obnoxious, I never thought that that's a card they are concerned about or gonna nerf, and now they did. Going forward, that's the second campaign card, by the way, so we have 2 campaign cards nerfed in one patch compared to 0 before lifetime. And yeah, instead of the copies still costing the same, each copy will cost 1 more, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and so on. So already killing 3 attachments is going to be really hard with Boar, and killing 2 is going to be fairly costly, and whole like merchant juggling is also going to become a lot harder. Among others because they keep getting more expensive, so then you suddenly have this like 3 or 4 cost Boar in your market that you can get later technically, but is super expensive to use. So yeah, the card is a lot weaker now. It's still an okay market card, but I think you cannot just like auto include it as a catch-all in your market anymore. You basically need to have like very specific targets that you need to deal with in the format, otherwise it's not going to be worth the market slot. Like, just because there's a couple of permafrost and random attachments running around, you can't really run Boar anymore, I think. But it's not bad. Like, Boar was pretty obnoxious to like relic heavy decks, and kind of suppressed the use of a lot of relics there, also like relic based ramp and stuff like that. So opening that up more seems definitely like a net positive to the game, increasing diversity potentially. Then we have a couple of minor buffs. Adolescent Death Jaws Bounce Shift now costs 3 instead of 4, making it a lot nicer, especially in limited. I still don't think it's gonna make it into constructed, very likely, but yeah, I mean, it's at least something that you can think about now, maybe in very fringe decks, as opposed to before where it was a no-brainer to not play it. Then we have Crooked Alley Guide, now is 3/3. I still think the fire version of that Shift 1 guy, the 3/4 Reckless, is overall much better in decks that would care about this type of stuff. But sure, if you're in Shadow and don't have access to that, this could be a decent consideration, although I feel like by the time it comes around, 3/3 is just such weak stats, because like 3/3 in constructed is basically 2-drop stats, while 3/4 is like reasonable 3-drop stats, or like low-end 3-drop stats, basically. So that lack of like force toughness there just for the scout is iffy. Don't think this card is gonna matter too much. Next we have Expedition Leader, the guy that draws you cards for emerging units. Still don't think this is gonna be a thing, but at least it's a more interesting like kind of casual deck, rogue deck tool to brew around with, even though I don't think it's gonna be seriously competitive. Then we have Tantrum, costs 2 instead of 3 now, which is pretty nice. Like, the card is actually quite powerful now. Dealing 4 with Overwhelm for 2 is a pretty good deal. But yeah, there are not a lot of shift cards in constructed, like constructed playable shift cards to enable it, which is its main problem really. But the rate, at least aside from the condition, is pretty constructed viable now, I would say, especially given that it also goes to the face, unlike say the Grenadine version of this. Then we have some minor limited buffs. Elder Meditant is now a 2/2 Aegis. It's the guy that with shift draws a card, so at least if you draw 1 card you can end up with a 3/1, not a 2/1, which allows you to trade much better in limited, making this a bit more reasonable to play, because I felt like the card was pretty awful before. And then we have Murderous Flock. It's a 4/3 now instead of a 3/3, making it a nicer situational flyer on 4 and line up a bit better if it doesn't have flying, among others. Then we have some more fringe buffs or build around type stuff. Larai the Appraiser, the like relic suppressing 06 I think she is, now twists for 2 instead of 3 to search for relics equal to her attack. Then Perilous Research Alarming Findings has been changed. Alarming Findings now cost 7 instead of 8. Card is kind of a coolish build around, but ultimately probably not that constructed relevant. But maybe you can build some cool fun deck with it to have some success on ladder, maybe. And then we have a change to Tazbu the Forbidden. He now counts for himself to draw a card, which is a pretty big deal because now he's always a 2-for-1 and even a 3-for-1 if you warp him, which is amazing. And the ability was already pretty good before. It just wasn't quite worth the stretch you had to go through, because then he's such a big threat, so the opponent will just make sure they can kill him every time, so they just kill your Tazbu first, and a lot of the time his text won't matter. Now that his text counts for itself, the card is actually a really good constructed card and is like arguably better than Godan, and Godan actually already looked pretty powerful on paper, just had issues finding a home. And then we have Shumokan, the Surveyor, was buffed from a 6-6 to a 7-7, which is a very good change, because I made fun of how poor the card lines up to even like easier castable time 5 drops, and now it's at least 7-7, so it's big enough to beat everything, like beat the 6-6 Heart of the Vaults, the 6-7 Worldbreaker Behemoth, and actually generate some noticeable advantage for just being a random ground guy with not even overwhelm, and just being at least big enough to beat everything and make the 5-time worth the investment, because now the ambush is also much more valuable, because you can actually ambush meaningful units rather than just medium-sized stuff that doesn't matter as much, and that Shumokan would just outclass easily. So yeah, that's a good change. Still not gonna be a great card probably, but now it's at least a card that you can reasonably consider in a deck, compared to before where it was just like, why would I even play this if I can just play Worldbreaker Behemoth or Arled? And then we have Bam Sneaky Peeky, now shifts for 3 instead of 4, which is pretty sweet, because now that means you actually have much more of a choice. You can use it on 3 to shift, or you can just play it on 4 regularly. So if you shift it on 3, it's gonna be back faster and makes the shift much more appealing, because it is already a pretty nice disruptive tool. Also adding to like the curve flexibility of a Yeti deck. I might do like an update to the Yeti's deck, because there are a couple of cool new cards that added to the deck. Sorry about that. And last but not least, we have Incendiary Slagmite, which costs double fire and was way too restrictive. Now it costs single fire and opens it up to a wider range of decks, considering it for market disruption, which is nice because it's an interesting effect. It already struggled from being like a 3-1. We all know how bad 1 toughness units are. So there's still a lot of issues with the card, and I'm not sure how much we're gonna see it, but at least now more decks can consider it in fringe cases where they might want it, because they can at least play it even though they might not be super happy with the 3-1 stats. So yeah, that's it for the balance changes. Quite a lot of changes. We'll see how they impact worlds. I feel like the format right now is a bit muddled, like Stone Sky is the clear tier 1 deck, but past that it all seems a bit like muddled, like still some Huro control and Huro mid-rangey stuff, some Yennefer and Winchest seeing a bit of a resurgence. There's still some Praxis around, but the main point of Praxis was to try and be a bit of a favorite against the Huro control decks, which are now much less of a factor, and being bad against the now most dominant deck Stone Sky is problematic for Praxis, so we'll see how things shake out for Worlds. I'm doing my testing and figuring out what I like in the coming weeks, and then we'll see how it pans out. Alright, that's it again for this time. Hope you guys still enjoyed this very belated take on the balance changes. As usual, you can find the link down below in the description. And also, quick news here, I set up a very rudimentary Patreon page for my stream and content and so on. There are no tiers yet or anything, but yeah, there might be people that there were people that mentioned that they would prefer something like that, and it's just a nice way to help support me and the content and stream that I put out, and just pledging like a single $1 per person would go a long way towards helping me invest more time in this and doing this as a side job and even long term a maybe full-time job, focusing all my time on sharing my insight and content with you guys and spending my time streaming for you guys and having fun together. And I mean, just on here we have 3,500 subscribers almost, and even if only a fraction of those pledge, like a third of you pledge $1 a month, we're already talking like minimum wage job income here, basically, that would allow me to just like skip any potential student job, side job stuff, and just pour all my time that I have available for working outside of university or some free time into my content, into my stream, and expand on it. If there are people that have any ideas or suggestions for tier rewards and stuff like that, ways to expand the Patreon, I'm happy to hear those. Best way to suggest them is probably on my Discord channel, which you can also find in the description below, or maybe talk to me on stream about it. I'm always happy to hear from you guys and talk to you and get your ideas, get your take on things. Yeah, inspire each other to create the best possible like community and content that we can here, because that's part of what makes this so enjoyable and why I would love to do this as a job, as an occupation, as a means to make a living, because it's just great doing things with other people together, have a great time together, and help your people get better at the game and enjoy the games that we like together. Alright, so check it out. You can find all of this in the description below, and otherwise, you know the usual drill. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet, turn on notifications, like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with your friends, and so on and so forth. And yeah, one last thing, turn off your ad block on eternaltitans.com and YouTube to help support the content in a completely free way as well. That's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching, and I see you later on my stream.